So there were basically 4 types of media, really, inside my scope model. So social, paid, owned, and earned. And you put them all against each other, and you really begin to look at what innovation can we have. And the innovation happens in the crossovers. So we're paid and owned. What does that mean? This is where people will do cool stuff. I mentioned the Oprah example, right? Where she's turned paid into earned. Or she's turned earned into paid, rather. But for the person who's earned it previously now pays, right? And final really interesting slant on this is my kind of brand value equation. So I mentioned that consumers don't see the difference between paid, owned, and earned and shared media. And the problem is marketing departments are organized in stovepipes. They even use agencies differently for each competence and skill, which means the money gets carved up, which means it's political, right? It means it's a bad idea when people are running it instead of metrics, right? And so what you should be doing is saying, here's my marketing bucket, whichever of you perform better gets the budget, and I need to structure people dynamically so that, we can put money in for experimentation on social and how do we get more blogger outreach and earned media. It's very classic to me that the big brands basically find it so easy to just go and buy a bunch of advertising because they have a guy in place that goes and you have an agency that does it, they go and buy the media spend, and it's really easy to do, right? It's in process. But for them to challenge that, we don't have a guy running blogger outreach or social content creation, right? And if he does, he doesn't have the budget. But you can, if you move stuff around, if you realize that these things are all multiplied together, and if you do something in one and it has a positive effect, right? So you can spend less on paid and possibly get more bang for your buck out of social, out of earned media, out of paid exposure, etc. So the other revelation that came to me as I went through this was, because I've talked about, who's connection-centric, right, versus content-centric, and I mapped that back to these different media types and says, actually, people who are content-centric are about solving a problem. They have utility in mind. They don't know the person they're talking to at that point, but they're talking about solutions to problems. How do I get something from A to B? That's my customer problem, right? Or whatever it is, whatever my pain point is, you're going to create content that answers questions, that solves problems. And people who love your stuff don't care about you and your brand. They care about how you and your brand solve their problems, so they will rave about those problems. So so basically social content and paid exposure are content-centric media types. On the other side of the equation, owned media is really your own blog is for your customers, right? And so that way it's about connection-centric. It's about people that you know, but it's also for your fans and influencers and skeptics. Those are the other people that are going to go to your blog and consume that content. So it's just an interesting connection between that, map that back together. I did want one last point to mention is in the search process, when people go and look for stuff, they don't look. I've come to this conclusion by asking a bunch of millennials. I've walked into different bars and restaurants, and I've always asked this question, just a curious thing. How do you search for stuff? And the feedback I got from this not too extensive research study, but it's enough to know they don't search for an individual thing. They actually want to find a list of things, right? Somebody's curated. So you look for the best, coffee roasting, blah, 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 in Portland, right? People skim past the ones that bring up individual coffee roasting houses. They will jump to the list of the best of, and then from that human curated list, they're using other people to help them filter the world, right? Because we're all trying to filter. So thinking about that process of how people discover your content. Are you building the content that could be the answer to that question, right? You're not trying to find pinpoint answers. You're trying to look at the questions your customers are asking. They're probably way more basic than you'd ever imagined. We tend to write for our own intellect and our own ego instead of actually really crawling down on the basic level where the customer turns up and they're asking insanely simple questions that really aren't on your website. It's like the FAQ is one thing, but there's a thing called a FOOQ, which is the frequently unanswered questions, which, is kind of scary but interesting and true. So